was a peaceful evening flight that promised nothing but calm skies. The hum of the engines was steady, and most passengers had settled into their seats, some watching movies, others reading, and a few already asleep. Outside, the sunset spread like a painting across the horizon, shades of gold and violet reflecting off the airplane's wings. Among the 183 passengers sat 11-year-old Emily Carter, a small girl with brown curls and bright blue eyes. She was curled up against the window, pink headphones over her ears, listening to a soft lullaby playlist her late father had made for her. To anyone watching, she looked like just another child lost in a dream. But that playlist was her lifeline, the only voice that kept her father's memory alive. Major Daniel Carter had been a decorated U.S. Air Force fighter pilot, known for his precision and courage. 2 years earlier, he had died during a training mission gone wrong, leaving behind his wife and young daughter. Emily had grown up surrounded by her father's flight memorabilia, his medals, badges, and flight logs. Her favorite piece was his Air Force badge, which she wore on a necklace everywhere she went. This flight from Dallas to Seattle was her first trip alone since his death. She was traveling to visit her grandparents, and though the airline had assigned a kind flight attendant named Megan to check on her throughout the journey, Emily still felt a small ache of loneliness. Her father had always told her, "The sky isn't empty, sweetheart. It's where dreams fly free." Tonight, those words echoed faintly in her mind as she drifted back to sleep. For the first hour, everything was normal. The seatbelt signs were off, and the crew began serving drinks. The passengers chatted quietly, and Megan smiled each time she passed Emily's seat. The calm atmosphere felt almost too perfect, like the stillness before a storm. Suddenly, a crackle came over the intercom, and the captain's voice, usually smooth and reassuring, now carried a strange urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," he said, pausing briefly as if searching for words. "If there's any fighter pilot or aviation officer on board, please make yourself known to the crew immediately." The cabin went dead silent. Every passenger looked around, waiting for someone to stand up, but no one moved. Then the plane trembled slightly, a faint shudder that made the overhead compartments rattle. A man sitting 2 rows ahead muttered nervously, "That's not something you ever want to hear mid-flight." The tension spread like wildfire. A woman in the front row gasped, clutching her husband's arm. Another fainted, and a flight attendant rushed to help her. Megan hurried down the aisle, whispering something to her colleague before disappearing toward the cockpit. In minutes, whispers began circulating. The co-pilot had collapsed. The rumor hit Emily's section quickly. People speculated about a heart attack, maybe a stroke. Whatever it was, the captain was now flying alone, and something about the plane's movement didn't feel right anymore. The smooth hum had turned into uneven turbulence, the kind that made your stomach twist. Emily stirred awake as the plane jolted. She blinked at the dim lights, noticing the anxious expressions around her. "What's happening?" she asked softly, tugging her headphones down. The woman seated next to her, trying to hide her fear, smiled faintly. "Just a little bump, sweetheart." Nothing to worry about, but Emily had grown up around pilots. She recognized the shift in tone, the barely masked panic in people's eyes, and the quick pace of the flight attendants' movements. Her heart began to race. The air felt heavier now, filled with quiet tension that words couldn't hide. She turned her gaze toward the front of the plane. The cockpit door had been left slightly open in the confusion, and through the narrow gap she could see flashes of light from the instrument panel. 2 attendants rushed inside, one carrying a medical kit, another gripping a small metallic key. Something was wrong, very wrong. Then she saw him, the captain, his hand trembling as he reached across the controls, sweat glistening on his forehead under the harsh glow of red warning lights. For a moment, she caught sight of a small photograph taped near the dashboard, something she might have missed if she hadn't looked closely. But when her eyes focused, her breath caught in her throat. It was a picture of her father. Emily's pulse quickened. Her father, smiling in his Air Force uniform, stood shoulder to shoulder with another man, a man in a pilot's uniform. She recognized him instantly from stories her father used to tell. His friend and squadron mate, Captain Samuel Lawson. Her mind flashed back to nights sitting on her father's lap, hearing him say, "Lawson's the kind of pilot you'd trust your life with, Emily. Cool under pressure, always calm in chaos." And now, that same man was fighting to keep the plane from falling out of the sky. Her body moved before her brain could stop it. She unbuckled her seatbelt, her small hands trembling. "Sweetheart, stay seated." The woman next to her whispered in alarm, but Emily didn't listen. She could hear the echo of her father's voice in her head, telling her that fear was a choice, and courage meant stepping forward when it mattered most. Clutching the silver Air Force badge around her neck, she took a deep breath and stood up. The aisle felt longer than ever as she walked toward the front, her heart pounding like a drum inside her chest. Passengers watched in confusion as the little girl moved toward the cockpit. A flight attendant spotted her and tried to stop her, kneeling down to block her path. "Honey, you can't go in there," she said softly, but Emily shook her head. "He knows my dad," she insisted, pointing toward the captain. "Please, I have to help him." There was something in her voice, something steady and certain, that made the attendant hesitate. Then another jolt rocked the plane, sending a few trays tumbling. The attendant lost her balance for just a moment, and Emily slipped past her, stepping through the open door into the cockpit. Inside, alarms flashed red across the panel, and the altimeter needle dipped dangerously low. Captain Lawson was gripping the controls tightly, his knuckles white, his focus split between flying and calling for ground support. When he turned and saw her, time seemed to freeze. His eyes widened in shock, recognition dawning almost instantly. "Emily?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "You're Daniel's daughter." She nodded, her eyes shining. "Dad taught me everything about these planes," she said softly. "He used to say you're the best pilot he ever flew with." Lawson's throat tightened. He could hardly believe she was there. For a moment, it was as if Daniel's presence filled the cockpit again. The plane shuddered once more, and he turned back to the controls, muttering, "We've lost partial control of the left engine, and I can't reach the stabilizer." Without hesitation, Emily leaned forward, her small hand pointing to the backup panel. "Dad said if that happens, reroute through the auxiliary hydraulics, under the panel." Lawson blinked, startled, but followed her direction. The instant he flipped the switches, the plane steadied. The violent shaking stopped. The storm outside still raged, but inside the cockpit, the chaos began to calm. Down in the cabin, passengers clutched one another, some praying, some crying, unaware that the help they needed had come from an 11-year-old girl. Slowly, the oxygen masks stopped swinging. The intercom buzzed, and Lawson's voice, now calm and steady, filled the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're back in control." Applause erupted, tears flowed, and relief washed over every face. But Emily just stood quietly beside the captain, clutching her father's badge, feeling as though the sky itself had whispered back to her father's voice. The crew's eyes widened as Emily stepped into the cockpit, her small figure illuminated by the warning lights flashing across the control panel. "Sweetheart, you can't be here!" one of the flight attendants exclaimed, trying to pull her back. But Captain Lawson's voice stopped everyone cold. "Wait," he said, his hands still tight on the yoke as the plane trembled. He turned his head and froze. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same hazel eyes, the same determined look. "Emily!" he breathed. The girl nodded shyly. "You're Daniel's daughter, aren't you?" His voice cracked slightly, memories rushing back. Emily nodded again, clutching the silver badge around her neck. "Dad taught me everything about planes," she said softly. "He used to say you were the best pilot he ever flew with." Lawson blinked hard, fighting emotion. "Your father saved my life once," he said quickly, voice shaking as another alarm blared. "And now I'm trying not to lose anyone else today." The control stick vibrated violently in his hand, and the cockpit lights flickered. "We've lost partial control of the left engine," he muttered, scanning the displays. "And I can't reach the stabilizer. It's jammed." Emily's small hands moved instinctively toward the backup control system. "Dad told me about this," she said quickly. If the stabilizer locks reroute through the auxiliary hydraulics under the panel, Lawson hesitated, staring at her. That's not something you should know, he said, but there was no time for doubt. The plane shuddered again, dipping to the left. Trust me, she pleaded. Lawson flipped the emergency panel open and followed her instructions. The switches clicked, the hydraulics hissed, and slowly, almost impossibly, the aircraft began to level out. The vibrations softened. The warning alarms faded one by one. Down in the cabin, oxygen masks dangled as passengers clung to their seats. A mother wept quietly, hugging her baby. Two men in business suits gripped the armrests, knuckles white. One flight attendant whispered, "Please, God, help him." Then, through the intercom, came the captain's steady voice, calmer, stronger. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're back in control." The cabin erupted in relieved gasps and muffled sobs. A few people started clapping. Emily's escort, the kind flight attendant, covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had no idea the little girl she'd been protecting just helped save everyone aboard. In the cockpit, Lawson glanced at the fuel gauge, low but manageable. "We're diverting to Boise Airfield for an emergency landing," he said into the radio. Air traffic control responded immediately, clearing the skies. Emily sat quietly beside him, her legs barely reaching the floor, but her expression was steady, calm, the same kind of calm her father used to carry into the storm. Lawson looked at her with awe. "You did good, kid," he said softly. "Your dad would be proud." Emily smiled faintly, fingers tracing the badge she wore. "He taught me to always listen to the sky," she whispered. The runway lights of Boise shimmered below, like a golden path through the darkness. The passengers braced for impact, but the landing was smooth, a perfect touchdown despite the chaos they'd faced. The moment the wheels hit the ground, the cabin erupted in cheers and applause. Fire trucks and ambulances raced alongside the plane, lights flashing red and blue through the windows. Lawson powered down the engines and exhaled deeply for the first time in what felt like hours. He turned to Emily, his voice barely above a whisper. "You just helped save 183 souls up here, just like your father would have." When the door opened, EMTs rushed to assist the unconscious first officer, while passengers stepped onto the runway, still shaking from the ordeal. Cameras flashed, news vans lined the tarmac, and the story began spreading before they even reached the terminal. Emily stood quietly beside Captain Lawson, her small hand still holding the badge. Reporters tried to ask her questions, but she stayed silent, just staring up at the dark sky. Somewhere up there, she felt her father watching. Lawson placed his captain's hat gently on her head and smiled. "You earned this more than I ever did," he said. By morning, headlines across the country told the same incredible story. 11-year-old girl helped save flight after captain's emergency call. Major Daniel Carter's name resurfaced, not just as a fallen hero, but as a father whose courage lived on through his daughter. Emily's photo, standing beside the plane with Captain Lawson, filled the front pages. Airlines sent messages of admiration, and the Air Force called it a testament to legacy and bravery. But Emily didn't see herself as a hero. When a reporter asked her how she stayed calm, she simply said, "Dad taught me that panic never helps the sky." Later, at the Boise Airfield's quiet terminal, Lawson walked Emily to the gate where her grandparents waited with open arms. "You saved a lot of lives tonight," he said softly, crouching to her level. Emily looked up, her eyes glimmering. "I just remembered what Dad taught me," she said. "Planes talk if you listen carefully." Lawson chuckled, wiping away a tear. "He always said that," he murmured. As she walked away, Emily turned back for a moment, waving goodbye. The captain stood at the glass, watching her go, feeling something deep shift in his heart: hope, courage, and peace. That night, the sky over Boise was clear and full of stars. Somewhere above those clouds, Emily imagined her father smiling down, proud, free, and flying as always. The events of that flight would be studied for years, not just for the technical miracle, but for the human spirit behind it. A little girl's memory, a pilot's courage, and a bond that even death couldn't break. Emily Carter didn't just save a plane. She reminded the world that love and bravery can echo through generations, carried by the wind, whispered by the sky, and remembered by those who dare to believe.